He invented the one and only Salvia Bong. He is one of only a handful of people that have taken a large dose of pure Salvinorum A in an MRI machine. That was prior to becoming the MRI machine in the rest of the universe. Uh, he moderates a salvia oriented independent social media network, and he grows salvia, he extracts salvia, and most importantly, probably, is he's had a personal practice of working one on one as a salvia guide for several years. He's the only person I've ever met that knows a lot more, frankly, about salvia than I do. And when I ran into him on another podcast a couple of months ago, I immediately thought that I needed to meet this guy. And so my channel doesn't usually do. God damn it! It's dropping acorns. I'm gonna get a concussion when one drops on my head. Let me start the video, okay? Oh my god, I almost forgot to say his name. I would make a terrible talk show host. Anyway, this is Christopher Solomon. My name is Chris too, so in my house we call him Salvia Solomon because Salvia Chris is taken. His website is salviahealings, plural.com. And anyway, let's watch the video. Why don't we just start? Why don't you just pretend that you didn't already talk to me a week ago and just, how did all this happen for you?
Well, yeah, there could be a short answer and a long answer. Maybe I can go with the medium one. Essentially my path of working with salvia has happened organically over, the course of many years. I first experienced salvia in high school, and like many people initially, it was just an odd, dissociative, meaningless experience that just felt strange. And but I was still kind of keyed into the fact that there was something there, but I wasn't quite sure what it was. And so it was really over the years of working with salvia, um, as I've mentioned before, a big shift for me came when I sat down to use salvia, and I just put a little bit of intentionality into the experience before I smoked it. And this was just something as simple as 10 slow, deep breaths. And when I sat and meditated for a little bit before smoking the salvia extract, it just was a completely different experience. That was the first time that I met what seemed like a feminine salvia entity that I had telepathic communication with. And it really clued me into the fact that more than other medicines, how one approaches salvia makes a big difference. I find that when one approaches salvia from the standpoint of wanting to do it from a recreational standpoint, it's never generally recreational. It's not fun. It's almost as if salvia knows, like, hey, you're doing this for the wrong reasons, and I'm gonna let you know from some way or another that this isn't the right way to go about it. So, when I work with clients, so for those of your viewers who don't know, I'm a somatic salvia guide. And so I guide people on one-on-one salvia sessions remotely via Zoom, and I incorporate aspects of somatic psychotherapy into my salvia practice, which is essentially just a fancy way of saying it's a very awareness on your body experience. So you're looking less into the content of the experience and going less for meaning making and going more for the experience of seeing how the salvia experience unfolds physically within your body and learning from the wisdom of your body and the messages that it has to give you.
Oh, that's interesting. That gets into a couple of topics.
Hmm,
One thing I was wondering about, well, I think I told you the other day that I'm going through a personal discernment, and
hmm,
it's identity, but it's also profession, right?
hmm,
That there's I think they call it the psychedelic renaissance
hmm.
going on right now, where
Yeah.
our culture is on fundamentally reevaluating how we view psychedelics, or you know, including salvia. I tend to use the word psychedelic very broadly. Some people mean it
Right.
more narrow and they wouldn't include it, but in general, I like broader categories
Hmm,
rather than narrow ones for me, even like in music. In any case, what was I getting to? Oh yeah, that I view myself as, being a little tiny part of this psychedelic renaissance, but exactly who I am or what my part in it is something that I'm working on, kind of.
hmm,
And so with that in mind, I was wondering how you identify. I think you may have just answered it, but like,
hmm,
do you identify as a shaman, as a
therapist.
Right. Yeah. I would never identify with myself as a shaman. It just doesn't seem right. It doesn't feel right. I'd identify more of myself as a teacher and a guide. Um, I have my certification as a Comey certified practitioner, which is a type of body-based psychotherapy. But I wouldn't really, I'm not a licensed therapist. And so a lot of my Hakomi somatic psychotherapy training, it was over a 2-year intensive training program. And then the other knowledge that I've gained was from just working with Salvia for about 15 years. And I also have an undergraduate degree in psychology, but that doesn't really provide much as far as teaching one how to be with a person in an expanded state of consciousness. So it's much less about analysis and more about helping the person get in touch with what's organically opening up within them. So the term that feels right to me is somatic salvia guide or salvia teacher.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I see now, we didn't talk about it much the other day, that the somatic part is kind of your specialty and a big part of your identity, just as much as the salvia is.
Right, definitely. And they're very closely intrinsically tied with each other. Um, there's a way in which one can have what one learns in one's salvia experiences and kind of take note of where those experiences unfold within your body, and then use that to make a non-salvia based meditation practice or a mindfulness practice. So your salvia experiences can be a useful guide as far as how do you then engage with yourself when you're sober, without the use of substances. And there's many, many ways in which salvia shows up. And part of that is, um, it's oftentimes in line with the modality that people view their own life through. So I work with some clients who've done a lot of internal family parts work on IFS, internal family systems, which is getting in a dialogue with different parts of yourself, like the protector and your inner child, and so on and so forth. And so they smoke salvia, and that's how salvia presents itself to them. Or people who are longtime meditators, they smoke salvia and they find themselves being taken to a place of deep, deep, restful meditation. And so they're like, oh, that's how salvia shows up for me. So, the salvia experience itself, it's, no one can know what you're going through other than yourself, really. Like, even if it's a very experienced guide, they can't truly know what you're going through. So they can really just be there for you and work organically as the process unfolds. But it's really about the relationship that you're creating with yourself and the plant and the spirit of the plant. So it's a kind of like a relational triad.
Yeah. On one hand, that's sort of obvious, but
Right.
you're absolutely right. And I think it's probably more so somehow I mean, the content of every trip, I mean, the content of every day of your life, it
Mm.
really is who you are.
Mm.
And that's particularly true on psychedelics, but salvia, when people say, "Oh, I've had such a bad experience," or, "It was so frightening," I always think that's who you were. It's not the salvia's fault.
Mm.
Um, because it shines this light on whatever is going on in your life, or even whoever you are at that particular time.
Yeah, right.
It,
And
it
at the
never
same
occurred to
time,
me
so
to think of
that
it as very physical. No, go ahead.
oh yeah, there's definitely truth to that, but one can also minimize the amount of fear that one experiences on salvia based on one's dosage, which is another big thing that I teach about as well. Um, I think, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there on salvia, unfortunately, and a lot of the information that was out there in the late 2000s and still online today is that you have to pack a big bowl and smoke it as quickly as possible, and that it's an experience that has to be rushed in a way. It's like, oh, you got to use a torch lighter and you got to smoke it all at once or else it won't work. And I think one of the biggest game changers for me was when I asked myself the question, because I was having a similar experience where I would have remarkable salvia experiences, but sometimes they were terrifying experiences. And I noticed that me feeling scared about the salvia experiences was actually getting in the way of me going back to it and creating a consistent practice. So I asked myself the question, what's the minimum amount of salvia that I need to smoke in order to feel anything at all? And so I'd just smoke one tiny flake of extract, and I'd wait a few minutes and see what arose from that. And then I was like, no, don't feel anything there. And then I'd smoke another piece of extract. And then I'm feeling a little bit something now. So I think a huge game changer for many people is knowing that it's a manageable medicine if you take small doses with at least 5 minutes between the bowls, which is how I work when I do guided sessions with my clients. So
Uh,
that is to that's in response to the fear. Sometimes there's fear that arises within ourselves that we can lean into and get into a dialogue with and really get clear about what exactly it is we're scared of and get clear on whether this is actually a valid fear, whether it's a fear that's based in our present reality or whether it's an imagined fear. But also one can mitigate the fear by approaching it slowly and mindfully and being with the experience every step of the way, rather than just having this steamroller of an experience just coming through and flattening one over in no time at all. That can be a little bit too much for the system to get used to.
yeah, particularly since I'm dealing with the culture on YouTube a lot,
Mm,
and the salvia culture on YouTube is really dominated by
mm,
the huge bowls and a great big bong and hitting
mm.
it with, a butane lighter,
Yeah,
and then it's frustrating and sad that um, that is what salvia is on YouTube.
right.
Basic. And of course, the irony is that YouTube doesn't like it. They come down on salvia videos
Mm,
because so many of them are showing dangerous behavior.
mm,
So you don't blame them, but
right.
then the irony is it makes my life harder, or ultimately your life harder, right? Because that is the reputation of the medicine.
Yeah, there's a big educational component with my work as well, and a lot of it is trying to work against this narrative. Um, Many people come to me because they like to um, rewrite their initial negative salvia experiences. They're like, oh man, like 15 years ago, I had a scary salvia experience and it still stays with me. But I've heard about your slow approach and mindful approach, and I really want to see if I can revisit the salvia medicine and start to have it be a pragmatic tool in my life. But they're like, quite frankly, I'm scared shitless that this negative experience is going to happen again. And many people feel a lot of gratitude for being able to go back to salvia and have it be gentle and gesundheit as well. With
Sorry.
coughing over there. Yeah, yeah.
You get
Um,
that a lot. People who've had a bad experience.
Yeah, it's the people that I work with, it's all over it's all over the map. There are some people who, yeah, just want to rewrite the negative experience. There are other people who've never done any mind-altering substance in their entire life. They haven't even smoked cannabis, but they're curious about salvia.
Hmm.
I've worked with people in their, early 20s to their late 70s, and it really seems to be across the board. So some people are searching for relief from chronic pain, which salvia is very good at. Some people are searching for relief for their anxiety and depression, which salvia is very helpful for. Other people are just curious psychonauts and they just want to see what it's like to experience another dimension or have the traveling back in time experience. Um, so yeah, it seems as if no matter where you're coming at it from, salvia can offer a little bit of something to everyone. But the main overarching theme is don't do it at a house party.
Yeah, which is exact. You like the famous Miley Cyrus video.
Right. Yeah.
Have you seen that?
And I have, yeah,
Yeah.
back in the day. Hmm.
What's
Hmm.
funny is it's not even dramatic. It's just that she's famous and she's
Right.
at a party and people are, basically forcing her to do something that she shouldn't be doing.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
that video, that particular video, it influenced the wave of criminal of criminalization
Hmm.
a few years back.
Yeah, there was that, and then there was also a kid. His name was Brett. I forget his last name, but it was called Brett's Law. He committed suicide, and his parents blamed salvia.
Yeah.
And even though he'd well documented that he'd no longer smoked salvia for a long time, and um, I have a therapist friend who, whenever he's concerned that he has a client that is very close to committing suicide, or is very concerned about the strength of their suicidal ideation, he has them smoke salvia, and it makes them no longer want to commit suicide. And I've heard this from quite a few people as well, that they're in this funk where they feel like life's not worth living. And then they smoke salvia, and salvia gives them the experience of no longer being alive. They have a out of body dissociative experience where they feel as if their life has ended. And funnily enough, the one thing that makes people feel a lot of gratitude for their life is having the experience of feeling as if your life has been taken away from you. And then they come back to their body and they're like, oh my God, thank God I'm still alive. Thank God I have a body. Thank God that I'm an embodied human being on this 3D time space continuum, and like all these feelings of gratitude for the mere sake of the banal existence. Just everyday life can seem so refreshing once you feel it being taken away from you. And so anyway, this his Brett's parents, I think they had a lot of political sway and quite a lot of money. And they got some bills passed in a few states that made salvia illegal, but then the bills died in many other states as well, and it hasn't really been revisited since then.
That's what it seems, is that there was a wave 2008 to 2012, something like that, where
Mm-hmm.
all in the States, but also in other countries, it was literally a fad, you know,
Right.
and then
Yeah.
it got forgotten about. Now, from my research, there's not even very much they don't actually become relevant very much. You know, people don't get arrested for salvia or anything very much. The
Right.
online sellers are very liberal
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
about where they'll send their packages. You know,
Right.
I don't think even though it's illegal in most places, I'm not sure that there's anybody really paying attention.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. And there's, salvia itself just looks like any regular, leafy green when it's dried, or the extracts just look like little green flakes. Um, Many people don't even know exactly what salvia is. I'm going to bring a salvia plant and just I can show it to your audience so we can
Sounds
actually
good.
get an understanding of what this plant really is. I just have a few on my windowsill over here. So this here is a baby salvia. So you can see that it's just a regular looking leafy green plant. It's actually part of the mint family. So there's tons of different salvias. There's close to 1,000 different types of salvias. Um, the sage that one cooks with is Salvia officinalis. Rosemary has recently been reclassified as a salvia. Salvia rosmarinus. There's well, you go to like the Home Depot and you'll see salvias there, but you won't see Salvia Divinorum. So it's part of the mint family. You can see kind of it has a square stem, which is characteristic of a mint. It
Hmm.
has diametrically opposed leaves, and it's native to the cloud forests of Oaxaca outside of Mexico. And so the way it's used indigenously and traditionally is by chewing the leaves. And so you'll pick the leaves off the plant and you'll stack them on top of each other and roll it up like a cigar and chew it and keep it in your mouth. That's called quitting. So that's a much slower experience. It's more gentle. The effects come on in about uh, 20 to 30 minutes. They slowly rise up, and you can stay in a salvia state for about an hour, hour and a half, and then slowly come back down. So it's a much more gentle experience. So
And
traditionally, Mhm.
you can stay in that for that long just by one quid.
Yeah, yeah. If you hold the quid in your mouth, I noticed that sometimes I've held the quid in my mouth for well over an hour, and it stayed at this high peak for an hour. Then it got a little bit too deep. I was like, oh, I feel myself dissociating a little bit too much from reality, so I got scared. Then I spit the leaves out, or you can swallow them. Um, and then as soon as I spat them out, it slowly started to come down. And so traditionally it's used to treat rheumatism and addiction, alcoholism, and healing physical ailments, and for intestinal motility and diarrhea problems. And there's a lot of terpenes in salvia, and that's why it does that. So, the chewed experience, it's kind of cumbersome. You have to chew a lot of leaves. Most people don't really realize much at first, or they don't have that strong of an experience. Um, and then by comparison, the smoked experience, you smoke a bowl, it hits on in about 30 seconds, you peak for a few minutes, and then you come back down and you're back to normal. So it's the difference of a long arc or just a in and out. And so then the way I work with my clients, it's sort of like a middle ground between the two, where it's multiple small bowls that are smoked. And that sort of is in line with the quit experience. I see you grabbing your salvia pipe
Yeah,
there.
I just got it in the mail yesterday.
Aha, yay, it
Thanks, you
arrived.
sent it to me pretty fast.
Yeah, I have one right here as well.
My bowls are completely clean. I haven't used it yet.
Good. Yeah, these bowls are clean as well because I'm going to be mailing this one out later today.
Yeah.
Um,
It's funny. It feels loose, and at first I was like, it's very rubbery, but then you
hmm.
test it, and the seal is great.
Yeah, the seal's
It's a really
fantastic.
tight seal.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I mean I designed and I manufacture these myself, and the way it works is you put a tiny amount of salvia in each one of the bowls, and you just put enough to where each bowl is enough to feel a little bit of something, but not enough to have a strong experience. And then you put a little bit of water in it and you smoke, smoke, smoke. And then when you're ready to go a little bit deeper, you just pick up the bowls, rotate them, and move to the next one. And then you pick up the bowls, rotate them, and move to the next one. So that way you can stay with the salvia experience, you can stay in a state of mindfulness, and just slowly take yourself deeper. So there you have a lot of agency and control actually over how deep you go with your salvia experience. You can smoke one bowl and go a little bit into the space, and then kind of come back to baseline. And then you can smoke the next bowl and go a little bit deeper, and then come back to baseline. Or if you're feeling adventurous, you can smoke at the height of each one of the peaks. So you can go deeper, 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 or you can go in, out, and pendulate back and forth. And this pendulating back and forth is really the preferred way for most people. It gives your body time to adjust to the experience. It's like 5 little mini trips, and each one has its own content that you can study and be with and see. But it's nice because okay, I'm not going to be shot out like a cannon and lose complete touch with reality. I can actually be with what's coming up as it's coming up, and really listen to the messages that salvia has to teach.
I'm really excited to try it that way, actually. Couple of things. I'm excited about it for two reasons.
Hmm.
Um, I actually, to tell you the truth, I knew that this was out there several years ago. I saw
Hmm.
it on somebody's video. I think that you had maybe sent one to what's the Inner Art? The guy who work on YouTube that works with or salvia archetypes. His
Oh,
channel's
right,
not very active anymore, but he's got a lot
right,
of
right.
subs. It used to be a big thing.
Yeah, interbeing art, I think it was.
That's it. I think I might have seen it on his channel. I saw it somewhere.
Mm. Yeah.
And I actually, um, you're gonna be like, oh no. I looked for it because I knew it was out there and I knew that I wanted one and I couldn't find it.
Right.
Until I ran into you over that other over Adventures in the Mind.
Yeah, I'm the only one in the world making them.
Yeah, so I'm sure it was yours. That was a year or
Mm.
two ago that I ran into it.
Yeah.
Um,
Mm.
so I have done more informally um, back to back bowls before, like at a
Mm.
camp. I remember one time years ago being at a campfire and
Mm.
just hitting my pipe every time I came down. I just hit it again, and it took a
Mm.
lot of discipline because even when you're having
Yeah.
good experiences, it's still scary every time.
Yeah. Salvia does take some gumption and discipline, and that's why I say more than other psychedelics, salvia is definitely a practice. I find no matter how euphoric of a salvia experience I might have, which people hear that and they think salvia euphoric, how can that be? But if you take it slowly and mindfully, one can really drop into some beautiful, spacious spaces where one's being just feels huge and comfortable and like you're under a weighted blanket. It can really be quite wonderful. But it's funny, even when I have a wonderful salvia experience, and during the experience, I think, man, this is great. I need to do this more often. Once you kind of come back to yourself, there's zero compulsion to go back and do it again. So it's very self-regulating. So that's why it is kind of like a practice. You're like, okay, there's really nothing in me that's calling me to it aside from some deep knowing, but there's no physiological craving. um, I think I've read some research that they say that salvia actually temporarily decreases your dopamine levels, and which is why it's actually very good for addiction. So your dopamine levels are currently decreased for a small amount of time, and then when you come off of the salvia, your dopamine levels go back to normal. But relatively speaking, their normal level is now higher than it was on the salvia. So then sobriety feels better.
Hmm.
Versus when you take something like cocaine or alcohol and your dopamine levels shoot up, then they come back down to normal. And by comparison, normalcy feels boring or dull.
Yeah.
And so, salvia is, I like to call it like a great neutralizer. If you're up, it'll bring you down. If you're down, it'll bring you up. And, this is important when setting expectations for salvia as well. People think like, oh, am I going to have all my problems healed and life's going to be perfect after I have this medicine journey? And Salvia's like, well, no, let's just get you to a baseline of normalcy where everything just feels okay. And from that place, then it's your job to get engaged with yourself and the world around you and kind of pick up the slack from there. So it's very much about like, let's just get you to this baseline of comfortable homeostasis, and then let's take it from there. Versus thinking, oh, I'm going to be having this insightful, revelatory, mind expanding experience, or I'm going to get all the answers to my problems. But Salvia is less about having lots of downloads of information coming to one's mind and more so about just feeling comfortable within one's own being and having some resourcefulness and some spaciousness.
Yeah. And that really connects to your emphasis on embodiment.
Right. Mm. And at the same time, though, one can also have completely wild and crazy experiences that make for great trip reports.
Yeah, I noticed that you had a list when you were talking to the Adventures in the Mind guy. You had
Mm.
a list of the things, specific things you thought it was good for, 3 or 4. And I watched the whole thing and thought, my God, I didn't disagree with him once. um, I would say the main things I use it for are uh, surface level stress relief. Like
Mm.
if I'm just not feeling right and I
Yeah.
need to like just reset. uh,
Right.
and sometimes if I am in that space, sober meditation doesn't actually work very well because
Yeah.
I just won't drop into it.
Mm.
But salvia can really do it. I'll just be, I always go in with an intention and I'll be like,
Mm.
I just need a healing, just a fast clean out.
Clean out. Very cleaning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it works really well.
Yeah.
The other thing is I'm a pretty cognitive guy, and with psychedelics in general, a lot of it is about channeling or downloads, cultivating
Mm.
wisdom, finding answers,
Mm.
and but each one is a little different. If every different medicine, I mean,
Mm.
and it's hard to describe the specialty of salvia, but it works really well. In
Yeah.
particular for practical questions.
Right. Yeah. Do you have any examples in your own life of how you've found a practical solution showing itself to you on Salvia?
Yeah, actually, my go-to example,
Mm.
and I like this example because when it comes to when it comes to psychedelics, people are usually thinking about traveling to other universes,
Mm,
or they're thinking about like enlightenment, or finding the answer to free will.
yeah.
And so my favorite example is I lost my cat a
Mm,
few years ago, and I fucked up. He like ran away for reasons that aren't important to us, but I was really distraught. It was that night,
yeah.
and I was like, I was out of my mind. I fucked up, and
Yeah.
my cat was gone, and I was never going to see him again
Mm,
because he
that-
got lost in the neighborhood that wasn't his neighborhood.
oh, yeah.
And I didn't know what to do, and I was so distraught. And I went into my room, I closed my eyes, smoked some salvia, and I went into that space for about 60 seconds. And the
Mm,
answer I got was, get off your ass and go find your cat. And then I like put up like the cliche signs and stuff. I went out
yeah.
on walks in the neighborhood every day, and after 6 weeks, I found my cat. And then
Wow.
he lived with my family for another like 15 years.
Wow. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. Salvia can be so um curt and blunt, and it's sort of like, what the hell are you doing sitting here meditating with me? You actually need to be doing something about this instead of just contemplating, looking for answers. There's something so much about Salvia's message about the importance of getting engaged with our lives. Like, hey, just get off your ass and do this thing. Salvia is a very forward-moving medicine, I found. It's less concerned about what happened in one's past, and it's more concerned about the present moment and what you're going to do next. Um, I find as well, uh, you know, sometimes I'll chew the leaves, and I feel even if I walk around a little bit after chewing some leaves, it feels like there's a bungee cord pulling me forward, and there's just this forward feeling motion, like let's go. And people have the experience as well with salvia where they feel like they're being ushered somewhere else, like by entities, and they're saying like, "Hey, come on, let's go, let's go," almost as if one's already late for something. Like, "Hey, you better catch up with us." Um, so yeah, it's definitely, MDMA is can be very looking at what happened to you in the past and revisiting it and getting closure and getting insight and understanding and viewing it from a place of self-acceptance and compassion. But I found when I've tried to revisit old things on Salvia, sometimes the messages, Salvia comes in and I hear her saying like, "Hey, man, like, I'm sorry this happened to you." So there is an empathetic understanding and witnessing that I received from Salvia. And at the same time, she's like, but it's in the past. It's no longer real. It's only a reality as much as you make it a reality by revisiting it in your mind and ruminating over it. So, you can choose to live in the past and bring your past into the present and future, but you don't have to. There's another way. So Salvia can be very good at sort of like getting a break from one's own internal narrative, and just looking at the very next pragmatic thing that has to be done.
Yeah, I guess that's what I found too.
Mm, mm, yeah. And I found as well it's also very good for emotional regulation when other emotionally regulating practices don't work. There's an example that I'd like to give of, about a year ago, I had a rattlesnake encounter. And because I live out in the country in Northern California, in the mountains, like a hermit, and there's lots of rattlesnakes around here, especially during the summer. And it was a rattlesnake that was right next to my tomato bed, and I almost stepped on it, and I'd never encountered a rattlesnake before.
Mm.
And if I see a rattlesnake out in the wild, I'll leave it be. But because it was in my garden space, I had to kill it. And so I'd never killed any snake before. If I see a spider in the house, I usually take it out. But I was like, you know what, this thing's actually a threat to me. I almost stood on it, and I don't feel comfortable with a animal that can kill me living right amongst my tomatoes and my vegetable beds. So I had to take a shovel and I have to chop its head off. Made the rattling noise, which was quite scary. Um, and I noticed for the entire rest of the day, I was still very worked up and agitated about the experience because in order to kill the snake, I had to put myself in a precarious position where had I messed up and missed the snake, it could have lashed out and bit me, and I don't know snake striking ranges, and there were all these unknowns, you know. So as far as my body was concerned, it was like, hey, Christopher, you're putting yourself in what might be a situation to where you could get bit and then, you know, lose a limb or die. And so anyway, killed the snake, and even though the snake was no longer a threat, my body could just not relax. I was very agitated. So I tried meditating, and that didn't help. And even that night, I went to bed and I was trying to fall asleep. And my body was like, danger, 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 you know? And I was like, no, body, it's safe. Like, it's fine. The rattlesnake's gone. This is not a problem. But my body did not believe it at all. And so I thought, okay, well, let me, you know, and I have training in somatic psychotherapy. Like I feel like I should have been able to have calmed myself naturally.
Hmm.
But I was like, well, maybe I'll go to salvia for this. And I smoked just one tiny bowl of salvia. And within 10 seconds, I just felt these warm waves coming in. And I felt the salvia reassuring my body directly. And the message salvia was giving my body, which was the same thing that I've been saying to myself, but the message was given directly to my cells and my nervous system. And it was saying, like, hey, it's okay. You're safe. You're safe. You're safe. It just repeated, you're safe. It's okay. Really nurturing. Um, and then what it said as well, which I thought was interesting, was it said, we would never let anything bad happen to you. So there was almost this sense of like, hey, we're also going to look out for you in the future, which was something that my body, I felt, really needed to hear. It's like, not only are you currently safe, but we got your back in the future. Now, that doesn't mean I'm going to be impervious to rattlesnakes or anything like that, but it was the message that my body needed. And within minutes, I just completely calmed down, came back to a totally grounded place of neutrality, then fell asleep a few minutes later. Um, and so for that same reason, I've worked with people who have PTSD, they're in a fight or flight response, some people who are very high anxiety, and salvia comes in and just takes their anxiety away within a span of minutes.
Yeah, and boom.
Boom, indeed.
You know, a couple of thoughts. One that's interesting is your story. Is it reminds me of a technique that I use that I've I even have one of my early salvia videos. I taught this. How do you deal with the peak? Because the peak is
Mm,
dramatic if you
mm,
smoke a fair bit.
mm,
Um, and I use this to this day on my deeper experiences. Is that voice of, "Oh, you're okay. You're safe. You're just fine."
mm,
I It's funny because I don't think in terms of entities really. That's not my
mm,
experience. And but using that my inner voice and then consciously dissociating it from it as if it was another being is something that I practice.
mm,
And if I'm going into a deep salvia space, or even I've learned to do it on other substances too, but I got it from salvia, is you just
mm,
literally repeat in my head, it's okay,
mm,
keep going. You're safe.
yeah.
Go in, fall in as deep as you can.
Mm,
And I'll get
mm,
into a space where that's all that's there. It's just
mm,
this voice saying, you're okay, just keep going. And I
right.
choose to trust it and I keep going.
Excellent. Yeah, yeah, that's a mindful connection of having focused awareness. And it can be there can be so many anchors in which one goes to. I discovered one the other day, which I call it somatic praying. That's just the term that came to me. The reason why I call it somatic praying is I was having it was a ketamine experience actually, and I felt like I was going a little bit deep. And so what I did is I put my hands together like this. And all I did was I just focused all my awareness on the feeling of warmth between my hands. So I felt the warmth from my right hand on my left hand, and I felt the warmth from my left hand on my right hand. And I just put all my energy and awareness just into the feeling of warmth. And then I call it somatic praying is because after a while, I was like, oh, these are the positions your hands are in when you're praying. And somatic body-based. So it's a body-based prayer. And and so I was having all these scary thoughts, like, oh, I'm going too deep, you know, and whatever the fear thoughts were coming up. And but then by me placing my awareness on the heat between my hands, after only a few minutes, the only thing that was in my awareness was I felt as if the totality of my being was the space between my hands. And because there was something constant about the temperature, that introduced what felt like a sense of normalcy and constancy. So I think, many times when we get scared, it can feel quite chaotic and all over the place. And you're like, oh, there's too much going on, there's overwhelm. But then focusing on something grounding and something as tangible as a mantra in your way, you repeating it, it's almost like a mantra,
Yeah.
saying safe. And this, I thought about it, actually, a mantra would be repeating something verbally, but this felt after a while almost like a mudra. Um, because, and for those of you listeners, like a mudra is like hand positions that they do in with meditations. Like this is a mudra, and there's all sorts of hand positions that they do. What I noticed is when this became everything that I was aware of, just this stable baseline. Then what I actually did is I then opened up my hands a little bit. And by opening up my hands, that opened up some newness in the experience and then started to provide some more content. So it's almost like I used the somatic praying to get to a place of stillness within. And then I opened up my hands and that introduced some new movement. But it was newness coming from a grounded place. So it didn't feel chaotic. And when I did that, I was like, oh, so that's what mudras are good for. So it was a nice little like firsthand learning and experiencing. So there's things we can learn about our experiences time and time again, which is what makes these medicines so fascinating.
Um, that's funny. I I just starting to get into ketamine. I shouldn't say I'm getting into it. I haven't decided whether or not I like it.
Yeah,
Um,
I know what you mean.
yeah. Uh, my last one though was the best, I think, and I'm only doing relatively low doses. And I'm only bringing this up because again, it's similar to what you were talking about. I found I did it twice. The first
Mm,
time I meditated, and it almost felt like cheating. It was just so easy to go into deep space. I was like,
mm,
I've been here before.
mm,
And so I decided to leave to be more external.
mm,
And I was in my bedroom where there's a full length mirror.
mm,
And I stripped down naked and started in front of the mirror, started practicing karate because I study
huh,
karate. And
mm,
I did a repeated kind of a repeated form that I had to work
mm,
on anyway. But
mm,
I just like looked at the mirror, dealt with my body
mm,
while slowly teaching myself the details of the movement. And
mm,
we've talked about discipline. I um, I hate to say I forced myself. I just chose that
mm,
I am going to, from the moment I take it, I'm
mm,
going to keep on doing this form
mm,
until I know I'm coming down the whole
mm.
time,
Wow.
right? And in this case, we're talking 30 minutes.
Mhm.
And it was fascinating. It's
Yeah.
somewhat similar to what you're talking about.
Right, exactly, definitely. Yeah, mirror work with these substances is interesting. I find that low dose salvia experiences while looking in a mirror is actually quite an interesting experience. I've noticed that one looks a lot younger to oneself. I smoked salvia one time and I was standing in front of a mirror and I looked like a kid again. And there was almost like this childlike playful energy that was because people experience on salvia as well a sense of playfulness, childlike playfulness can come into the experience quite often as well. And so I felt this childlike playfulness within my system. And then when I was looking in the mirror again, I looked like I was 10 years old. Um, and it was just nice to feel like that was a moment of reconnecting with my inner child, but without needing to be um like it just happened. I wasn't needing to try too hard. And there wasn't like, I'm not like, oh, I'm going to go connect with my inner child in order to comfort it or in order to be there for it. There's this whole school of self-parenting where you can do things for your inner child that your parents never did for you. And but with on Salvia, it was just like, nope, this is just seeing the youngness that's still alive within your body. And for a long time after that, I continued to hold on to the sense of kind of joy that little children can feel when they're feeling carefree. So
That's
mirror work with
nice.
Salvia is quite interesting.
Yeah, I might do that. I've done it with mushrooms, definitely.
Mm,
can't remember particularly salvia. I was going to ask, and
Mm.
if you're uncomfortable talking about this, then we, won't put it up or whatever. But I'm curious about your relationship with other medicines.
Yeah. Um, I have a long-standing relationship with quite a few medicines. Um, I mean, in college, took a lot of mushrooms just recreationally. Um, but then, went through a phase where I was drinking a lot of ayahuasca. Went through a phase where I was doing a lot of MDMA. Um, Ayahuasca really was the other medicine that introduced a lot of intentionality into my medicine practice. And so, yeah, and ketamine, I was the same way initially. I was like, I don't know if I like this ketamine or not. You feel kind of chemically afterwards. You're kind of heavy and foggy. It doesn't feel as clean as salvia feels. Um, but yeah, so I don't know if you have any specific questions about any of my relationships or experiences with other medicines, but I have a few under my belt.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Um, um, One thing that has become part of my specialty, I guess,
Mm,
is um, I'm even a little bit uncomfortable because it's very controversial. So I am a little uncomfortable talking about it on my channel, although
mm,
I talk about everything. um, that's something that I've really gotten into in the last few years is
mm,
stacking relatively low doses of
mm.
multiple medicines.
Oh
And
yeah.
I've really gotten into, like, I'll give you you take half a hit of acid. I like acid a lot.
Mm,
Um, but I'm not a huge fan of big doses of acid.
yeah.
Uh, so let's say half a hit of acid. If you want to get higher with weed. It's a good
Mm,
modulator. And then for the peak, you've got any combination of DMT and salvia.
mm,
Not necessarily at the peak of the acid, you might do it afterward.
right.
But what that allows is that you can sort of like an alchemist. People say I'm an alchemist when I talk about this,
Mm,
that you can shape your trip by strategically mixing and matching different substances. And the
mm,
DMT and or salvia is this big, big peak, but it
mm,
doesn't add to the length. So you could do it in an evening.
right. Yeah. Yeah, I've found that DMT and salvia is actually quite a wonderful combination, and I like doing low doses of both. Um, DMT can have quite a lot of body load. Just when you do DMT by itself, it can really feel like a heavy experience. There can be quite a lot of nausea sometimes with DMT. There can be quite a lot of anxiety that comes up even at lower doses. And because salvia is anti-anxiety inducing and salvia also takes away nausea, I find that the combination of a low dose of DMT and a low dose of salvia at the same time makes for a very you still get the grounding anchored heaviness that salvia provides and the spaciousness, but then you also get the energy and the visuals and the heart opening experience that DMT is. And so I feel like they have a very good synergy with each other. I found salvia works quite well with many, many things. There's a few reports I've read online of people who are on MDMA and they smoked salvia and it put an end to their MDMA experience. Like they were peaking on MDMA, they smoked salvia, they had a salvia experience, then the salvia wore off, and they were totally sober afterwards.
Really?
Yeah, I haven't tried that out personally because every time I've been on MDMA, I'm like, well, I don't want this to end. And so, but I've noticed salvia is very good at integrating other medicines as well. If you've had a challenging mushroom experience, or even the day after an MDMA experience, if you're feeling kind of achy and you've got like the post-Molly blues, they call it, a little bit of salvia does a really, really good job of just kind of bringing you back to yourself, clearing out any residual yuckiness that might be hanging around in the body, and just resetting one. So it's a fantastic integrator.
That does make a lot of sense.
Although I will
Mm.
say I use salvia while I'm on other substances, including MDMA, on a regular basis. And
Mm.
for me, sobering up is not what it does.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay.
Absolutely the opposite. And
Yeah.
I'll have I like MDMA at all a lot,
Mm.
but even higher doses don't give you a classic psychedelic peak.
Right.
um, which is its strength, but also what if you want that? And so
Mm.
usually I'll wait until either the peak or kind of after the peak, um,
Mm.
and then smoke salvia and or DMT,
Mm. Mm.
and that really becomes the peak of the evening.
Mm. Right.
Uh, and so it yeah, the idea of using that to end your trip is like absolutely the not my
Mm.
experience.
Hmm. Okay. Well, that's another data point. It's
Yeah.
and so interesting to know if it's going to be doing the same thing for everyone. Um, and this gets one into the question of everyone's different brain chemistry and other medication one might be on. One thing that's nice about salvia is, it's not a classic psychedelic because it's not an alkaloid and it doesn't affect the 5-HT2A receptors, which means that you can be on antidepressants and take salvia and there's not going to be any contraindications. So other people, when they do mushrooms or ayahuasca, they have to get off of certain antidepressants for a while, and that can be challenging. So I found that there's very little contraindication that I found with salvia and other medications that one's on,
Mm,
which
yeah.
makes it accessible for more people.
I think I've heard the speculation um, that there are anti like dopamine drugs. I don't know very much about this stuff at all, and that be since salvia is a dopamine oriented drug, um, that it's possible that those might affect your salvia experience.
Hmm. Yeah. Hmm.
Like the one I'm thinking about is naltrexone. You know that?
Oh, yeah. Hmm.
I mean, it's pretty speculative, but if all of your dopamine receptors are, I don't know how, not working as much or whatever, then that could potentially affect your salvia experience.
Yeah, I've had a handful of clients who were on naltrexone actually. And so, and they've actually done, I have a friend, she's a toxicologist and a pharmacologist and has done a lot of research into salvia. And she did a study specifically on the interaction between naltrexone and salvia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there's actually research that they've done in it that's been published.
Oh,
And
okay.
what they found is that when they gave someone a therapeutic dose of naltrexone, I forget what it was in milligrams, um, and then they gave them a decent amount of salvia, I also don't remember what the dosage was, they found that the naltrexone canceled out the effects of salvia.
All right.
So there was nothing bad that happened. The salvia just didn't work.
Oh, okay. I'm going to be honest. I do not remember if I may have ran into that and read it,
Mm.
or I may have made that up myself.
It's hard to know sometimes. You're like, is this something that just came to my brain out of my own brain, or is this something that I really know? Um, but my first-hand experience with working with people on naltrexone was that they still had a salvia experience while on naltrexone. Now, granted, these people were taking a lower dose of naltrexone that they used in the study.
Mhm.
So if one is on a higher dose of naltrexone, you might just need more salvia. But the people that I worked with that were on naltrexone that smoked the salvia, for them it actually seemed as if the experience was more physiological euphoric than other people.
Mm.
It seemed as if it felt better in their body. There was more moaning. Where with salvia generally it's not a moanful experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but I haven't really found anything that salvia doesn't work well with. And Johns Hopkins has done some studies on salvia, and in order to do human trials with it, they had to prove to the FDA that it's a very safe substance, and so that's been clinically proven as well, which is quite wonderful.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah.
I read your essay
Mm.
about when you did the experiment at John Hopkins.
Yeah.
Um, And for the sake of our video, you could go into it a little bit. But what
Mhm.
I didn't get in that essay was the results. And that's what I was
Mm.
disappointed at when I read it, because I was really interested in what the fMRI actually showed.
Right, right. Yeah. So the results were still being researched and analyzed when I wrote the essay about it. So I should probably do a follow-up. You're right, actually, because they have since released the results. And so essentially what happened was Johns Hopkins did a study with, it was Roland Griffiths, who's done a lot of the psilocybin work and for end-of-life cancer patients, and Fred Barrett, who is now Fred Barrett has taken over Roland Griffiths' position at Johns Hopkins. And so essentially, there were 12 participants, and they gave us a high dose of vaporized salvinorin A when we were in an fMRI machine. And the purpose of the study was to look at the brain connectivity while smoking salvia. And what they found that salvia, more than any of the other psychedelics, salvia affects the default mode network. So it's kind of curious that everyone's like, oh, mushrooms and LSD, they affect the default mode network, and that's where a lot of the focus is. But salvia affects the default mode network way more than any of the other psychedelics. And the default mode network is, one of its roles is to create our comprehension and understanding of our autobiographical sense of self. And so when you smoke salvia, that's why so many people have amnesiac experience where they kind of forget who they are, they forget what they're doing, kind of gives you a break from yourself.
Yeah.
And so there's something intrinsically beneficial, it seems, by having your default mode network affected like it is on salvia, where it gives you a chance to kind of step out of your own narrative, get out of your own way, and have seemingly random experiences, and then you come back to your body and it feels as if um, you're like, oh, well, those things that I was stressing about beforehand don't seem to carry as much weight anymore. But the experience itself, smoking salvia in an MRI was really, really wild because I just, I turned into the MRI at one point. I became the
Mhm.
electromagnetic waves that were scanning me. I progressively got bigger and bigger and bigger till I became the hospital, and then I became the Earth, and then I became the solar system, and I got bigger and bigger and bigger till I essentially became my own universe. And so it was, and if you go to my website, salviahealings.com, you can read in depth about it there.
Yeah, that was quite a good story. That's interesting. I didn't know about that, Salvia. I did read an article recently about the default, what's it called again? The default neural
Default,
system. I'm not saying it right.
default mode network.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Mhm.
I might go back to that with the context that salvia affects it particularly.
Right, right.
I would say salvia. I compare it to a surgical tool.
Mm,
It, even on low doses, it cuts into your identity, kind of cuts into your
mm,
experience on a really low level.
mm,
That's why I like it more than DMT. I like DMT, but I feel like DMT is that's why that they complement each other, which you brought up.
mm, mm,
DMT is sort of more flashy and
mm,
hallucination oriented and go have an experience. But I can smoke as much DMT as I can, and I'm
mm.
still there.
Yeah,
Whereas salvia, it's a surgical tool.
right.
It's like I'm going underneath my life, and from the
Mm,
position of being underneath my life, I can do, a lack of a better word, like psychic surgery on myself.
yeah, for sure. Definitely. Yeah, that rings true to me, and many of the people that I've guided as well. They were like, wow, you can really be so specific. When I guide people, what I like to do initially is have, you can take a passive approach or you can take an active approach. And, the active approach would be something like, okay, I feel this energy in my body and I'm going to zoom in on that specifically and try work with it and move it through my body and get engaged with the experience. But initially, what I like to recommend people do is take a passive approach where you're just sitting there with mindfulness and an objective view of just seeing the various ways in which salvia can show up. Like, oh, it's showing up here now, and it's presenting itself to me like this now. Just being a passive observer where all you have to do is just be aware of the experience. And, let salvia get to know you, you get to know salvia, and take things slowly. And then after doing that a few times, then you can get a little bit more actively engaged. And then there's a whole slew of different practices that one can do. But, getting people started is just like, okay, just smoke a little bit, be mindful and see what's there. And then kind of take note of the various things without trying to make too much meaning right off the bat. But I feel like both of those have an advantage.
Yeah, you may be right. I tend to emphasize intentionality with all psychedelics because I sort of don't trust. I mean, it's a certain fear mechanism on my own part, I suppose, is that I don't trust psychedelic experiences to take me to someplace I'm going to like unless I'm putting some intentionality into it. But, maybe that's a healing that I need. And then, if I can learn to trust without that directionness, the directionness, then that's something that I can teach others.
Yeah, I mean that's a beautiful point you bring up as well. One thing that we can learn about ourselves is seeing how we engage with the medicines. How do we engage with ourselves during the experience, and what might that say about us? Just hearing what you're saying just now, it sounds as if there's something to where you are feeling as if unless you put that intentionality is by default, it's not going to go to a pleasant experience. And so you can kind of take a step back at that and look at that and be like, okay, well, that's not a thought that everyone has. This is a thought that I have. And so are there other ways in which I take this belief about my life and I carry it to other situations? So I think, when one looks at how one engages with the psychedelic experience, then you can see, okay, how I engage with this, how do I engage with my regular world similarly? For example, I was doing a session with someone and they smoked the bowl, and the very first thought that came to mind was, oh, I probably fucked that up. I probably didn't smoke that bowl correctly. So then they were sitting there having the salvia experience. They obviously did smoke it correctly. And even though they were having a salvia experience, there was still that voice that was saying, like, probably messed that up. You didn't hold your breath long enough. And there was this critical judge that came up and was kind of yammering away in the background for that whole first or second bowl that it was that they smoked. And so, that's a unique window. It's just like, okay, you can see how by default, this critical voice of self-doubt just came up out of the blue. And where else does that show up? Like, how often is that voice in the back of your psyche kind of yammering away? And so, you can have a short salvia meditation, 15, 20 minutes, but within that, you can learn quite a lot about yourself, about these core natural processes that just come up subconsciously without us being aware of them.
It's really fun talking to you because you're talking about issues that, sometimes you're talking about issues that are on my mind, but they're so salvia specific that I don't have anybody to talk to about it, really.
Right.
And then oftentimes you've got perspectives that are basically never contradictory to my own, but where either you've gone deeper or you've gone off to a tangent that I've never even thought about.
Cool. Nice. Yeah, I think about this stuff a lot.
Yeah. I hear you.
Yeah, sometimes I'm like, geez, do I think about anything else? And no, I do. I think about other things for sure, but it's I mean, it's just, and especially working with people as well. I've guided over 200 sessions, so having witnessed 200 other people's salvia experiences, there's a lot that I've seen that informs where this information is coming from. So Yeah.
Yeah, people are different, and some people, well, I don't know if this happens to you, where you just load and load and load and they never feel it.
Yeah, I've not too much, funnily enough. There's Yeah, very rarely actually. Most people that I work with, it's like they'll smoke salvia alone, but then they'll come to me and have a session and then they feel it.
Mm,
So there might just be something about, the way that you know, I can see what is a salvia effect and what is not a salvia effect. And sometimes there can be such objective clarity to people's salvia experiences to where it doesn't seem as if it's rare or unique. Like for example, I was doing a session with someone and he said, um, he was like, well, I kind of feel like I'm being stretched out like a two-dimensional plane into infinity. But other than that, I'm not really feeling anything. Like I don't think it's you know and so we're like, okay, well, let's just look at the fact that you feel like you're being stretched out to infinity like a two-dimensional plane. There can be such a strange objectiveness with salvia to where it doesn't feel remarkable. It's so matter of fact that so then many times people are feeling something but they're really glossing over it. So um and I can see things by the change in their body language, change in their breathing. So getting them to place their awareness on what I'm witnessing, and then they're like, oh, and then deepening that and immersing them in that, and then the experience gets a little bit stronger. So yeah, many times one does feel something, but it's just getting clear about what exactly it is that one's looking for. If someone's looking for cannabis-like experiences, they're like, oh, I'm not getting a slew of creative ideas. Um, and it's just like, well, yeah, so you're kind of looking in the wrong place. Mm, mm,
yeah, I think that that can actually, that can happen to weed too, I think.
mm,
Uh, where people think that they don't feel it, but
yeah,
they actually do.
right, right. Yeah,
But they, as you say, they just don't know where they're looking.
right.
And at least with salvia, that I think it feeds into the notion of reverse tolerance.
Yeah.
If I've got a regular practice, uh, I've gone several times in my life, going maybe a few weeks of smoking every day, small
Mm,
doses, right? And in fact, I'm doing that lately.
mm,
Um, and I will maybe get to the point where, especially if I don't really have time, but I don't want to break my practice,
mm.
I'll just open up the vial and smell it
Huh,
and then
yeah.
meditate for 5 minutes. And that's my salvia session.
Wow, wonderful, beautiful. I like that a lot. That's nice. Yeah, yeah, because it's such a distinct, earthy, like almost like sandy, earthy scent I find salvia has. Yeah, yeah. So, there's so many people around the world who are having these, unique salvia experiences. And so, one of the things that I do as well is I host salvia integration sessions where I have people joining on a Zoom call and we just share our salvia experiences. And so you can listen about other people's experiences and give your own perspective and ask questions. But what I'm noticing is that there's so many communities out there that are, revolving around mushrooms or LSD or MDMA, and there's not really too many communities that are specifically focused on salvia. So, my salvia integration sessions are salvia specific, but one can talk about other medicines if one likes. And then one thing that I just launched very recently, just a few days ago, it's called the Somatic Salvia Network. And I'm sure we can have all these links in the description.
Yeah.
So somaticsalvianetwork.com. And it's a community where people, the intention is for them to join, and it's really a dedicated place for people to have salvia specific relationships with other people, but that's not like the salvia subreddit where it's just a bunch of memes and bad advice and people posting the same questions over and over again. And so it's really more of an intentional community for people who are getting serious about their salvia practice and want to meet with other practitioners who are exploring similarly. Because there's a lot of people who are using salvia in a intentional, mindful way, and we're spread out all over the world. But there's not much of a binding community around that. So that's one of the goals of the Somatic Salvia Network. And there's also on there's an introductory Somatic Salvia course where I talk about, it's about an hour of pre-recorded content where I go into the history of salvia and talk about its chemical composition, talk about a little bit of somatics, the history of somatic therapy, and talk about the intersection of salvia and somatic therapy, talk about how to be a good sitter. I talk about dosage. I talk about traditional methods. So it's really covers the gamut, and just it's yeah, so something that's up and running, and people can check it out and join and meet like-minded individuals.
Yeah, I think you're right that the world is a big place.
Hmm.
And even with something as fringe as salvia, there are actually a lot of people doing it, but they're very thinly spread,
Right. Mm. Yeah.
which is what the internet's for.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I've, met people from all over the world who are doing salvia, and, I've met some therapists who are starting to use it in their practice as well with their clients. Um, a lot of them are like, wow, I've listened to your educational podcasts, or I guide them on a session, and they realize, okay, this is something that I can see as being helpful for their clients. And so there's a few more, although it's very sparse, but there's a few more people starting to do work with salvia in this manner. Um, but guiding salvia is quite different from guiding other medicines as well. So, but and I think one thing that's nice about having a dedicated community is that you get to have continued conversations with people over time. And with that comes accountability, because there's the one aspect of having one salvia experiences, but then there's the whole other aspect of the integration, meaning how do I take what I've learned in these expanded states of consciousness and actually apply them to my life and actually do the work. Salvia or MDMA or LSD might give us some clear instructions about what we need to do next in life. But then we many times find ourselves not actually doing it. We're like,
Yeah.
oh, now I have like a laundry list of items that ayahuasca has told me to do. But it's kind of difficult to do the work of enacting those things. And so
Yeah.
one thing that I hope with a network is to have a group support system and an accountability support system where you can state a goal out there to the group chat. Be like, yeah, kind of Salvia's told me to start exercising more regularly, or Salvia's told me to finish this project or this claymation thing I'm doing, or whatever it is. And because like you were saying with your cat, Salvia is just like, get off your ass and go find your cat. Salvia can sometimes be like, hey, you really need to do this next thing in life because it's just important for your creative potential. And so part of it is just accountability and support that I think we all definitely need.
Yeah, and that does. Uh, um, the drugs don't give you all the answers.
Mhm.
There's other things that you need help, and all of us have probably had times. I find, for me, I would say MDMA is the biggest offender of giving me creative ideas that seem brilliant at the time, but
Mm.
then later on, the implementation. Um, I just don't do it because it's too much work, or I run
Mm.
into mental obstacles or financial obstacles, or maybe even just turns out it wasn't such a cool idea.
Right. Yeah.
And more more drugs is probably not always the answer.
Right. Yeah. Very rarely is. If that were the case, oh man, we'd be so enlightened.
It'd be so
uh,
easy.
and we'd be so productive. No, I was having this discussion with someone not too long ago, and he was, he had the same question, and he's been using ketamine a lot. And he's like, I take ketamine and I have these amazing ideas, but how do I know if they're worth their weight? How do I know if they're valid?
Hmm.
So there's this self-doubt that comes in. You can be in an extended state of consciousness. And I've experienced this with MDMA as well. And it's like, oh, of course, this is what I have to do. It's so clear, it's so simple. But you can only know whether the revelatory insights you had in an expanded state of consciousness are valid. You can only learn that by doing the implementation. You've got to actually do it. And so it's by actually doing it that you then learn, okay, I was right about this, but I might not have been right about this. That's when the work comes in. But that's when one can also feel disheartened because you're like, oh crap, it all felt so plain and simple and easy when I was thinking about an MDMA. But now that I'm actually doing it, there's resistance, there's doubt, things aren't working my way. I mean, the same thing was true when I created the salvia pipe. I got the idea for the pipe while I was meditating with salvia. And in my mind, it was like, oh, so easy, like a bowl, like a pipe with multiple bowls. But in the actual design and manufacturing, and then manufacturing the manufacturing system to where each pipe comes out the same was actually a hell of a lot of work. So it took a lot of iterations. So while it's logically a simple idea, it's like, oh, it's just a pipe. The actual making of it to where it looks nice, to where it's usability and it works perfectly every time. You know, I heard there's a saying with hardware development, which is the actual physical creation of things, that it's called hardware for a reason because it's hard to make. It's actually quite difficult to produce items consistently that look good and don't look amateurish and come out right every time. And so, yeah, it's really in the implementation that we meet the most struggles, but we also reap the most rewards. But it's hard to do it like alone, you know, one needs community.
Right.
Mm.
Are you having the same sort of feeling with the network?
Yeah, well, since it's just launched a few days ago, one thing I'm realizing is um, there was all the work that went into creating the course content and setting it up, but now there's the work of promotion and the marketing, which is a whole nother aspect of it. So I think there's a trap that one can fall into where we say build it and they will come. And that's not always the case. You can build it and you can have some great thing sitting out there, but people aren't necessarily going to be flocking to it right off the bat because, they're members of other networks, or they haven't got time, or they haven't got money, or they don't see the value in it initially. So I think some of the work is going to be in me. It might just come down to creating more content and putting it out there and educating people. But that's the tricky part. I don't do TikTok, I don't do Instagram. So I kind of need to start doing those things in order to be in front of more people. I'm not such a huge fan of self-promotion, really. Like I don't post on Reddit a bunch. I do occasionally. But I think for me, that's the sticking point. The work is I'm good at doing something and creating it and making it a reality, but then the continual self-promotion and marketing, that's a bit of a growth edge for me. Because I don't want to be like a sleazy sales guy, because I do take this work very seriously and it does have a large spiritual component. Um, but so I don't want to be all like, blowing up everyone's feed all the time. But so there's a balance, and I like the organic approach to growth, but it does take a lot slower.
Yeah, I hear that. And
Mm.
I guess I've changed my ways, but it is really easy to put a lot of passion into creating something, but the community's not there yet to support it.
Mm.
When I was an occupier in the Occupy movement, I wrote a
Mm.
book and
Mm.
I self-published it. I spent 2 years writing a book.
Mm.
Only by the time I was done, writing a book is hard, and the
Yeah, it is.
Occupy movement was really short.
Right.
And by the time I was ready to actually like publish it and stuff, it took about 2 years. The movement had already, well, I mean, it hadn't actually completely died because there are remnants to this day. But
Sure.
it was no longer the fashionable thing that people wanted to read a book about.
Right,
I
right.
spent so much time on that fucking thing, and um, it was well, basically, I didn't sell very many copies. That's what I'm really getting to.
Right, right.
And
Yeah,
I have to say I've done that numerous times.
yeah. Yeah, it's hard to get emotionally invested into something that's trending, but it's trending for a good reason. You know, it's not just a silly meme. There is actually a lot of important relevance behind why it's trending. Um, but the fads and the phases, they come and go so quickly, you know. So it's tricky. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you just like I made a video. Well, really, it took a few months to, if you include the shooting. I
Mm,
took fairly low dose of acid in by myself on the strip in Las Vegas. And I'll do this now. I'll trip
mm,
and shoot the whole time. Not
mm,
one time, but I've got just have my camera, right?
mm,
And I, whenever anything happens or whenever I have a thought, I shoot. So by
mm.
the end of a trip, I'll have 50 little 2 minute videos,
Smart. Yeah. Mm,
and it's a lot of fun. It's very
yeah.
rewarding, and I
Mm,
can get decent material out of it, at least to me.
mm.
Sometimes, but the editing is really a lot of work, right?
Yeah, it is.
Most of my work is just like shoot hardly any editing, not because I don't like editing, but because that's just the reality on
Mm,
YouTube, is that it's a
mm,
lot, quantity is important. And I
mm,
had to make a decision for this particular video that
mm.
I was going to do the work just because I wanted to do it. Because I
Good.
knew I was going to get 200 views. I knew it, I knew it wasn't worth the time, but like it
Yeah.
was just so much fun, and it made me as an artist, like help me remember that I'm an
Yeah.
artist.
Yeah. Beautiful. Yeah, you're doing it for you, you know? And I think it's so much more important to do things for oneself rather than for the views. Um, there's because there's something so fleeting in that. And I think, I would, you know, I've gotten to the point where my Salvi experiences are very personal and private, and I don't share them anymore with anyone. I just keep them all to myself. And as I've continued to cultivate my relationship with Salvia over the years, it's sort of Salvia is like, hey, there's something powerful about keeping your experience to yourself and not sharing it with the world. And so I found as I have kept my Salvia experiences private and to myself, generally speaking, um, they just carry more weight. And it's almost as if, salvia, I feel, can be the antithesis to the message behind social media. Social media is share everything, have it be seen. But salvia is just like, no, don't share anything and keep it all to yourself and lean into the power that comes with intimacy and private personal secrecy.
Mm.
Um, and so, because I was like, oh yeah, I saw one of your videos where you were smoking salvia on camera, and I was just like, I think back in the day I would have done that, but now I'm like, nope, my salvia experiences are super private and personal and intimate, and that lets me go deeper with the experience rather than trying to, in real time, think how I'm going to describe it to someone else.
Yeah, actually, that's a very, you see where I'm at. I do this like almost every day lately.
Mm, mm,
And even my bigger trips, I almost always shoot.
mm,
And what I'm finding is on one hand, um, I feel like it's my cross to bear
mm.
to to be that vulnerable
Yeah,
and to
yeah,
put
it's
it out
very
there.
vulnerable, very vulnerable. I don't think I could hold that vulnerability. Maybe it's just me not being as capable of displaying vulnerability as you are.
Well, maybe
Yeah.
I sort of accepted, as like as an artist and as a teacher that
Mm,
that's just my job. Even taking
mm,
some legal risks is just that's my job.
yeah. Mm,
At the same time, though, what I was going to say is that even though I actually use psychedelics quite a bit and I use salvia quite a bit,
mm,
I'm also finding that I am missing the depth of the personal private practice
mm,
because when I shoot salvia videos, I am not usually going very deep.
mm.
Uh,
Yeah, because you got to talk and think and
I talk, I prepare, talk, smoke, but it's not a lot.
mm,
I allow it to sink in, but usually I am talking by 60 seconds.
Mm.
So then that's the salvia peak. So the experience is real, but I'm not sinking in that deeply. As soon as I can feel that there's some content that has value coming up, that becomes the emphasis.
Yeah, 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 yeah. That's I think it's refreshing to know that there is a substance that one can have a shallow yet deep experience. You know, there's a lot of value to be had in exploring the shallow, subtle realms of salvia. And I think, you know, it's also the antithesis to a lot of the current narrative right now, where you have to have these huge heroic trips. Like everyone's taking like 6 or 7 grams of mushrooms nowadays, and I'm like, how the hell? Like, come on, what the heck? What happened to 2 grams and just doing that? You know, or people have to have like breakthrough experiences with 5-MeO DMT, where they're getting like so far out, you know, and so it's like that there's a time and a place for that, but I think many people are missing out a lot of value that can be had at these subtle lower doses.
I can't even tell you how much I agree.
Mm.
I agree completely. That's a big theme on my channel, really. Is let's
Yeah,
I even consider it almost a skill. Like, let's take lower doses. Like you were talking about with salvia, I'm going to smoke 1 flake and we'll
yeah,
see,
yeah,
right? Like, can we take little tiny doses and really, I think of it as wringing out a rag. How much experience can I
right,
get?
right.
I take 25% of a hit of acid. Can I have a real experience on that little?
Yeah,
And
yes, you
if the
can.
answer is no, maybe that's an area of growth.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Increasing sensitivity. I've worked with a few people who've been addicted to opioids, and for the years that they've been addicted to opioids, they've lost a lot of their, because emotions are physical feelings. And if you're on opioids all the time, you're not really actually going to fully feel your feelings because they're kind of numbed. And so they've lost a lot of their sensitivity and their ability to fully feel their feelings. And with that, they've lost the ability to feel what they might call intuition. They're like, I can't feel what's right or wrong anymore as far as what I need to do for myself. Because,
From
yeah,
opioids.
yeah. And we do salvia work together, and the salvia is very good at weaning them off of the opioids, but it's also very good at helping them get back in touch with feeling the subtleties of emotion that exist within their body. And then they're like, wow, I'm just like, with the it can be challenging because then they're feeling feelings again, and that's hard. But then it can also be quite liberating because they're getting guidance and wisdom and feedback from their feelings. So it's really just getting more information and data from oneself. And so, you know, she's been on opioids for a long time, and even after her first salvia session, she drank some tea afterwards. And she was like, I was able to feel the caffeine in black tea. And she was also taking some herbal supplements. And she was like, I was actually able to feel the herbal supplements making a difference. Whereas before, she was just taking them because she thought that was the right thing to do, but she didn't actually know whether it was doing anything or not. But the increased sensitivity that she was feeling with herself also tuned her into the ability that she was able to feel something like black tea more, more readily. And also, it also showed her that the yuckiness of the opioids that she was addicted to, you know, because she still took some opioids that night, and she felt it as a gross experience rather than feeling it as a wonderful, calming experience. And so she
Or
was
just
like,
taking it because
oh,
she always does.
right, exactly. Right. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot to be said for getting a little bit more in touch with the subtleties and seeing how much can we notice, and then taking it from there.
Yeah. That's where it kind of connects to Vipassana.
Definitely. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, let's see. Oh, let me tell you, I'm kind of moving out of thinking about our video, unless there's something you want to add.
Well, I'll just do a plug for my website. It's
Yeah,
Salvia.
please go ahead.
Yeah, salviahealings.com. That's the website that I use for getting in touch with people for salvia therapy, guided sessions. I do free 20-minute Zoom consultations. You can get the pipe there as well. I also sell the salvia pipe on salviapipe.com. Da, 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 da. And so with a guided session, I send you the salvia pipe, and then I also send pre-dosed gel caps of salvia as well. So I supply the medicine, and it's salvia that I all grow myself, and I make the extract myself. So, for example, like once this plant gets bigger, it's eventually going to be turned into medicine that I provide to my clients. And so I do everything myself at home. And yeah, so reach out to me. We can have a Zoom call, and I answer questions via email as well. And, I like actually getting engaged with human beings. So if any of your viewers want to just chat to me and reach out, more than welcome. And my email address is Christopher@salviahealings.com.
Very professional. It's not Gmail.
I know. Oh,
Very
fancy.
impressive.
I know. I've arrived. I've made it.
You've arrived.
Well,
Great, cool. Well, this was a great talk.
yeah, it was. And thank you so much for doing this.
You bet.